Okay, so this is our third Real Talk with an individual that we've gotten to do. So we've done John Arcana and we've done Dana Johnson, and today we are getting to sit and talk with you, Miss Taryn Hebert. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yay, thank you for coming. Well, I did want to ask you some questions, and I was just going to start off asking you to tell us a little bit about how you got into real estate.
Okay. My mother actually, many years ago, is the one who told me that I should be in real estate. And it just kind of segued from Henry graduating from college, and then he's like, it's your turn, so what do you really want to do? And I said, I want to be a professional waitress. And it really didn't work out that way. So I thought, yes, let me go ahead and do real estate to do the process. So,
Yeah. Well, whenever I talked to you and we were discussing sitting down and having a conversation, you had mentioned that you liked training your agents on the contract, or you liked teaching contract classes, and that was something that you valued. So I was going to ask you, have you always prioritized knowing the contract well, and did that help give you confidence at the beginning whenever you were an individual agent or when you first started?
Well, when I first started at Prudential, we did not have anyone to train us. There was no training.
Yeah.
There were no assistants. There was nothing, literally. Did you have that in Houston?
Yeah, we didn't have.
You didn't have anything either? I mean, you were just there?
Just there.
So do you feel like that affected your confidence as a new agent?
Well, it did.
Yeah.
In the beginning, it did. And the only thing that we had, our office manager had been an appraiser, so she would go with us. She would go with us on our listings and then, show us how to do a whole market analysis like an appraiser does, which is the worst. Yeah, I mean, it was all of that and having to measure the house, and it was just awful. So I learned that and then decided that I hated that.
So how did you go about learning the contract in depth? Whenever you were not in a system that supported that?
That's really good. Do you know who actually, I know maybe a couple of y'all know this, Ann Morrell helped me more than anyone. Pretty much like you read the contract and you can learn a lot by reading. I mean, seriously, so many people just don't
read the contract.
Yeah.
So many people don't read.
Yeah.
And it's like if you just read the sentence and see the blank, and if you don't understand it, like the survey
Don't be
thing.
afraid to ask.
Yeah, but there's just I'm sure there's a lot more depth to it, but a lot of it is self-explanatory.
Yeah. Do you feel like as you are in it for a little bit longer and get real life experiences, it makes a lot more sense? Because I think sometimes to a beginner, whenever you haven't seen any of that, it can kind of, go over your head and feel
Of
like
course,
yeah.
of course.
Probably on the other side of that coin though too, like the longer you're in it, I think it's easier to kind of gloss over it, or
Yeah.
if there's been any kind of major change. So I think like whether you're new or if you've been practicing for a while, it remains
other
as
up
important
things.
as it ever did to know those documents.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, awesome.
How much has that contract changed since you've been in the business?
Oh,
question.
a lot.
What is it up to, like, 8 or 9 pages now?
Yeah.
And
At
I've
least.
seen an old one, and they were very simple, weren't they? Or
Well, it still wasn't really that simple.
but it wasn't 8 or 9 pages.
Just, what we used to have, and I'm trying to think, was anybody in? Carrie, you were really when we had the repair allowances
Yeah.
instead of option periods. It's like you had to agree up front, a little bit like it is a relocation,
To a certain amount?
to a certain amount.
Yeah.
And what we used to see most often was like 500. And so on each deal that we had, once the inspections came in, we had to get bids. To see if we got, it was awful. It was awful. And then when it changed, we're like, option period, this is terrible. What are we gonna do? It's one of those things that changes and it's so much easier and so much better.
Yeah.
Well, do you think a lot of the changes are better now?
Yes.
The way it flows?
Yes.
And is more
Even with the bill.
explanatory, less,
For the most part, it's better. I think a lot of things are a little bit maybe not, like the survey thing.
The shortages in
I'm gonna
coverage.
keep throwing that up, but
I might have it, is what I said.
there are a few things that might be a little more complicated, but for the most part, I think it's in depth. We have so much more MCE than we used to have. I mean, and more classes that we can take, even if it's not mandatory, which I think is wonderful. Yes, and so I started doing all of my designations in the beginning. When I came to RE/MAX, a little less than 3 years in, I think I was already a CRS. So, pretty sure.
Designations were more popular
Oh,
in
yeah.
the earlier days.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And RE/MAX, do you remember this? RE/MAX was 100%, was it all CRSs or GRIs?
CRSs.
100%.
Nice.
I love that.
And then I think Mark
Were
came.
mild.
Mark was in there.
Whenever we discuss exclusions and things like that, how important is that to verify the exclusions? And have you ever been in a situation where you have had to buy something random because something was left out?
Yes, and I've always been really cautious about it, but, you know, when you're listing a house also,
Yes.
people just don't think. And when you go, you have to, and I used to like highlight everything and say, you've got to read this, please, stars by it, everything. Now, when you don't really, a lot of things are done by DocuSign, and it's just, a lot of things slip through the cracks.
Yeah.
And I don't like that part of DocuSign, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But, no, the one time I had to buy a refrigerator, and it wasn't because of any reason other than I had sold their property, sold them a property, and when we went to look at the other property, he said something about, well, we're getting to keep ours, right? And I didn't have the contract in front of me, and I guess I just agreed with him.
Yeah.
And then clearly we didn't. We'd given
And then you
them
were
the
buying a fridge.
refrigerator,
Yeah.
so we got a new refrigerator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you
So-
feel like that left enough of an impact that after
Oh,
that you were
oh,
like, what are you doing with the fridge?
Oh, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
always ask, you know, okay, refrigerators, washers, and dryers, do not stay. If you want to leave it, you need to let me know. You know, just very cautious. The thing that's coming now is, you know, the Ring doorbells and
Yeah,
all of
the bigger
that, which
systems and-
people say, well, why would I even consider leaving my Ring doorbell? Well,
It's attached. Just
because, and you got to read about it, and
Yeah. So you
Can
feel
I
like it's
ask
not-
a question?
I never have
Of
that.
Taryn, do you have a, you know, and I don't, because I know every contract's gonna be different.
Yeah.
But, you know, still similar in the confines and the boundaries of the document. So do you have an overall approach, like when you go into preparing a contract, is there a certain process that is just part of you when you go into making these? Or do you find that it's different, very different from contract to contract?
For the most part, and I think the easiest way that I have done it and the way I usually would train people, which has been a while since I have, is I like to divide it into 3 different parts, which one is the buyer rep and everything involving for the buyer. Then the second part is everything involving the property, the disclosures and everything about the property and the windstorm and all of the above. And then the other is all of the disclosures, all of the contracts. So
Sure.
the 3 different parts is the way that I try to keep it all separated.
Okay.
But
I was asking because I feel like that's a similar way that I approach longer documents or checklists or things like that. I find myself kind of getting into a pattern. Okay, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. So I just was curious
Yeah.
if you did the same thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
I do. And a lot of times I'll try to do I don't usually do the buyer rep until right before they're going to do a contract, but I also try to do it before we bombard them with all the other papers.
Yeah.
So it's like, if I know they're on the edge, let's go ahead and do it, but that's it.
So now we're talking about the earnest money, and I'd asked you the other day if you're one of those people that stresses your clients always make a 1% at least earnest money. Do you feel, can you touch on that? And also, do you feel like upping the earnest money or the option fee would make an offer more aggressive, or do you think it really doesn't matter?
It does matter.
Yeah.
Definitely matters.
Yeah.
And I think 1% is pretty well standard, and it's crazy to me when you have a $300,000 home and people do $1,000. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't
So
understand.
how do you handle that on the listing side when you get an offer like that? Is it like?
Well, I just tell them that it's not acceptable, we're gonna
Yeah.
counter it. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, that's
Yeah.
just,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
period, that's it.
Yeah. So as the termination of the option fee, whenever you have somebody that's making an offer, what's the least amount that you would recommend if they're still needing to do inspections and things like that? I know, you know, a cash offer is not gonna take that much, but,
You mean the option
yeah,
period?
the
option-
period, sorry.
The period?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
If I'm up against another contract, 7 days, but you've got to make sure that there's somebody out there that can get it done that quickly. And if it's an older house, really, I wouldn't go less than 10, because you're going to have to get bids before you know, unless you're working with a contractor that you know is going to be available to bid. You know, it just depends on the property. A newer property, then I
Yeah.
would not necessarily have that much of a problem with.
If they're going on a
7.
lesser amount, do you usually recommend that they start calling the appraisers right away and finding out how quickly they can get out
The
there?
inspectors,
I mean,
yes,
inspectors, sorry.
absolutely,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so we had talked about the shortages in area, and I won't have to have you talk about that too much, except for maybe which type of properties do you recommend for them
Okay,
to put it on?
if it's a lot in a block, I don't usually do it.
Yeah.
And if it's something that has sold recently,
Mm-hmm.
in the last 15, 20 years or less, then there's no point, because
Yeah.
it's gone through as long as it went through a title company.
Yeah.
Then you're gonna be fine.
Yeah.
So, but if it's something that's like an original owner, especially if it's out in the country, then I would absolutely.
Check it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Particularly south.
And if I had the buyer, I would absolutely, definitely check it.
especially south.
Do you recommend on that where it has buyer or seller pay for that? Do you always have your buyer pay for it because it's the lesser amount, or ask the seller, or just kind of take it each one?
It depends.
Yeah.
Depends on if we're up against another contract, how expensive the property. And I did pay for one of those on that Savannah Trace property that you sold. Remember that big one? He didn't know what that was all for, and I guess I hadn't explained it to him. And so I ended up paying him back for that.
How much was it?
You know, it's 5%.
$35 or something?
Well, it's
You're like
5% of the title policy, but it was a $700,000 house.
Yeah.
So,
That would be the time that it would happen, right?
so anyway, it was still, no,
Yeah.
so.
What was the question you were gonna
I
ask?
wanted to ask you, because you touched on this a little bit about DocuSign and how that's really changed everything. How do you, for you personally, how did that affect the way that you would communicate some of these bigger points with the client? And what do you think is the best way, I guess, for timeline? Because you said, you kind of break it out, buyer's rep, then the property, then the contract. So how, whenever you're communicating with your clients, do you make sure that those key points are covered?
I tried to do a lot of it when we're looking at the house,
Okay.
just kind of talking about the contract itself. It doesn't get into much legalese, which we're not supposed to do anyway, but, just kind of hitting the highlights. And really, I mean, that's it, unless they're sitting down in front of you,
Yeah. And
which,
you have it and you're, yeah.
yeah, and I really prefer that.
Yeah, I know when we talked the other day, you were saying how much you like for them to still meet you at the office, because we were saying how much we talked about that in class, but it doesn't happen as
Do
much
y'all
in
do
this day
that?
and age. but-
Do y'all still have your people come in?
Whenever COVID started and we were doing less face-to-face stuff, I started sending my disclosure pack out by DocuSign. Before we even made an offer, I would send it out by DocuSign and tell them, hey, y'all are gonna have to sign this if you make an offer. Anyway, so they'll be kind of thinking about it and learning how to do DocuSign. And then whenever the contract time came, I would get them to log into DocuSign that I had sent them, and you can go off to the side and go page by page down and talk to them about it.
Yeah.
And ask them, make sure they understand the key points. And so that's what I always do, especially if it's somebody that hasn't bought a house recently. Some people, no matter what you do, they're just gonna sign, sign,
Yeah.
sign,
Yeah,
they
they
don't
would.
care.
You
In
make
fact,
that
I've gone page by page with people before, while I was on DocuSign, and they've already got it completed in back. And they're just listening to me blab, But in my mind,
You've
I've
done-
done my job.
Yeah.
Right,
That's
When
right.
I
Yeah.
send it, I just say, please call me and I'll walk you through this if there's
Yeah.
anything you don't understand.
And then they sign it off.
And then, most of the time it comes right back.
Yep.
Yeah, bonus question.
Yeah, absolutely, jump in there.
Taryn, how do you explain to your clients the effective date? Because I feel like we hear this come up every now and again, not necessarily a dispute, but when one person,
That's right,
like one
yeah.
party's like, no, like it's on the contract, it's this date, and you're like, well,
Yeah.
not really.
Yeah.
So
And again, that is something that we have had conversations about many times, whether it's the date the last person signs or the date the last person signs and
And it gets
then
back to you.
notification
Yeah.
from the other agent. But notification could be just emailing them a copy of it, which we do
Right.
anyway,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I do think that can get hanky sometimes when you have
Yep.
someone that gets it signed that night, but they don't send it to you until the next day, you know what I mean, and then it stops. But
But have you ever had a problem with it really, though?
not anything that wasn't,
overcomeable.
overcomeable, yeah.
I was thinking too, like from like on the communication side with the client, like if they're, because I think sometimes I've heard and we've heard that the client is so dead set, like no, closing is going to happen on that day, when really it may not. It may
Yeah.
be 3
Oh,
days later,
absolutely.
5 days later. So I
Yeah.
think it's important to make that
Absolutely.
pretty clear up front. Like, yeah, you got an effective date, but here's what that really means.
Yeah.
You know, the contract is binding, but the date is a
I
little
tell
fluid.
everybody that.
Yeah,
It's just
target date.
picking a date on the calendar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean anything really.
yeah,
I will typically just say, are you
Shooting
guys gonna
for
be in town around this
Yeah.
time, roughly anywhere? Oh, yeah, sure, every time. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm on vacation.
yeah. Or be careful when renting a U-Haul
Yeah.
specifically for a
Yeah.
certain date, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So speaking of things that you have to sometimes explain into greater detail for clients, on the accepting the property as is,
Yeah.
how do you go about having to explain that to some of them? Because some of them, whenever they see that, they think, one
Oh,
thing, even though the writing tells them
Especially
to,
sellers.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, the contract says as is.
Yeah,
As is as they know based on what you have filled out on the disclosure.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
And then they understand that.
So do you feel that that means that, and I know we've had this posted on our Facebook page one time before, do you think that that means that they cannot negotiate things that were disclosed on the seller's disclosure?
No, it does not mean
Yeah,
that.
yeah, so you tell them still that?
Yeah, and I've had that argument from other agents a lot. Well, they disclosed that. I'm
Yeah.
like, so?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they don't want
I
to.
just know that's something that's come up in discussion on our pages, yeah.
Yeah, because if you put that on there, it almost kind of makes it seem like,
This is to be forgiven because, this was
Yeah.
the way it was when we bought it.
Yeah,
oh, that comes up all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
so y'all already talked about the closing date being kind of a moving target in some instances, but so, what about kind of going deeper on that subject, possession, whenever it talks about upon closing and funding, do you ever have to go into detail about what that means for those that think that they sign it and it's immediately theirs? Yeah.
Absolutely.
And how does that go?
Well, I mean, it depends on if I fire the seller. I make sure that they know that funding isn't necessarily the day of closing. That it could be the next business day or, often it is. And because we can only close what we can close, but the seller could close at the very end of the day just to make it not fund.
Yeah.
I mean, they could.
Do you see that very often, or have you seen that?
I have,
Yeah.
I definitely have.
And what
But a
was-
lot of times lenders will work late to get it funded, but not always.
Yeah. So on special provisions, what kind of things would you say are acceptable to write in there and things that,
Not much.
yeah?
I mean, not a whole lot, really.
Yeah.
Because you have to be careful about practicing law.
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to think of.
Remember how much we used to use it?
Yeah.
I mean, we used to use it all the time.
I saw
Yeah,
something
yeah.
recently, and I'm trying
Yeah.
to think, I know that we've written the
Yeah.
flood now, assumable flood policies in there, since there's not an amendment, that's something newer. But someone had mentioned something recently as well that could be written in there.
We used to have to write the
Oh.
home warranty in there, because the home warranty didn't have.
I know what it is.
Yeah, good.
And that
The-
wording.
I remember at
was so
some point
fluid. Everybody had their own
doing a
wording.
contingency.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have a
Right?
question about that. I mean, I've always, if I have it on for sale, subject to another property selling, I always put it there just for accentuation because even though I've got the addendum attached, when they're reading through it, I want them to know
Yeah.
that, I don't know if that's right or not.
I also, and this is something, that's what I was thinking of.
I don't think we're supposed to.
What
Well,
it-
we used to have to do for conventional financing, you had to put if it must appraise in special measures because they didn't have that.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
right.
really,
This is a
not that
reason.
Must appraise at or
Yeah.
above sales
Yeah.
price,
Yeah.
yes.
And then Eddie would
That's
put a
right.
sticky note on our files
Yeah.
and say, and then what?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So Taryn, was Hurricane Rita your first real estate hurricane?
Yes,
Yeah.
06,
Yeah.
05, into 05.
So how do you?
Oh, God, and that was awful.
Oh, yeah?
That was,
Were you just afraid like I was that your career was over? Like,
it was
Like there's no-
awful.
it was.
Why? What made you feel like you were
Oh,
nervous? Just putting
God.
ourselves back there?
It was damaged.
Because all of the properties were,
And
okay.
every listing we had, I can't remember, I had a ton of pendings. And every single one had to be re-inspected, reappraised.
Re-roofed.
Oh, it was
Trees
just,
removed off the roof.
it was awful,
Wow.
It was horrible.
awful. And then all of those people had to buy.
So now, let me ask you that, y'all that went through that. Going through something that major, does it make you more like PTSD when a hurricane is coming, or like, ha, we've been here before? Like, does it change of how you feel?
When it enters the Gulf, we
Yeah.
start getting worried.
Yeah.
It kind of gives you some reassurance now that we've been through so many.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
That life doesn't die.
End there,
I mean,
yeah.
life doesn't end, and there are things, and there's just a whole lot of extra frivolous services we have to provide during that time.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a great time to build clientele because
Yeah.
they need somebody to
Yeah.
listen to their stories and
Yeah.
listen to their
Right.
Empathetic.
needs, and
A lot of stories.
Yes, ma'am,
And
Vivian?
with all the delayed closings, you better have not spent every penny you had.
Yeah, the importance of saving. She said with all the delayed closings, you better not have spent all the money you had.
Yeah.
You did what?
Boost the market.
Yeah.
Always
First
did.
time I think we
did it
ever
too.
saw like a spike in price per square foot was after Hurricane Rita.
Yeah.
Really?
You feel like everything's new and refinished?
That's like the benchmark, and everything was a
New
reader
fences, new
roof.
roofs.
Yeah.
Reader
And
roof.
now,
Reader roof.
we're seeing them.
Oh, I was-
Talking about reader
Well,
roofs again.
And
Like you
then
don't
you had
see
that addendum to the self-disclosure notice where you had to, redo your
Oh,
disclosure.
yes,
all
that's
things,
right,
explain
all of that,
everything, all-
yeah.
Okay, so back to just some Taryn questions before we end. But so who was your greatest influence in real estate?
I mean, Hester Bell always, and Sally Bundy, and for two different reasons.
The Bunyan?
The Bunyan. Two different reasons, because Sally loved to take time off
Oh,
and go on vacation, and Hester liked to work.
Uh-huh.
So it's kind of
That was
like,
the balance.
I'm kind of an in-between.
yeah. I love that. I like hearing that. That's neat. Okay, so I've asked these questions to all of them, but what do you feel like is your greatest strength in business for you?
Oh. Honesty?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Um,
Transparency?
I think reputation.
Mhm.
Okay.
Somebody.
That would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's
Honesty,
good. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Dedication.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it takes that to have a career as
Oh, yeah.
long-lasting
Well, it
as yours
does.
is, for
Yeah.
sure, yeah.
It does.
Okay, and then on the other foot, whenever we're always talking about improving and growing, what is one area of your business you would like to grow in? I know you had talked the other day about some of your systems that you used to do and maybe bringing them back out.
Yes. Systems would be really good to get back to. but,
Yeah,
You know, and I probably will.
yeah. And you feel like that the crazy market is kind of what caused you to go out of those systems originally, or?
DocuSign, I
Yeah.
blame everything on
Yeah.
DocuSign.
Well, no, I mean, I think that does change how we
It
operate
really,
a lot,
it
yeah.
really has, and I love DocuSign so much in one respect, but then the other, it's like that's the bad side.
Yeah. And how many years have you been in real estate now?
Let's see, October 1st will be 33.
Okay, and so 33 years in, Taryn, what is one piece of advice, if you could, give to rookie Taryn now? They all laugh when I ask.
Well, it's 'cause it's funny.
It
I mean,
is.
I think that my first year in real estate, I made $18,000. And I was audited because I spent like $22,000 on education and all of the other stuff.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think But see, I did all of that, and so I can't say
Yeah.
that I would have done anything differently, because
Yeah.
you're only gonna get busier as time goes on, so you almost have to pay for the things that
Invest
you
in
need to
yourself.
learn first, because it gets harder as you go.
Before we wrap it up?
So Taryn, I am just curious, how are you planning to pivot during this upcoming recession? I mean, because I know the housing market crash, obviously you were there for that. I was 5, so I didn't know. I was at All Saints, but I was just curious, how do you kind of pivot to get more market share and, you know, not back down like other agents do or retreat? How do you kind of move forward?
Well, it's kind of interesting, because July was my slowest month in real estate ever.
This past July? Or?
Yeah.
Wow.
And now I am like so busy, I can't even
Breathe.
breathe. I mean, I've got a lot of stuff going on. So it's like you skip a month and make up
yourself.
for it the
Right.
next month, I guess. So I don't know that it's really gonna turn in a bad way.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think
stick doing what you're doing.
just
Yeah.
keep
What you-
doing
What
it,
I've heard
yeah.
from Carrie is that he made more in those years than he did previously, and I think that just goes to show, you know, if you keep going, you put yourself out there, and you know have those.
Oh,
strategies in place,
absolutely.
then you can dominate.
Absolutely. I ran across some of my things where I would advertise production.
Right.
And one was like over 27 million, and what
Yeah.
year was that?
Like 2011 or 2000, was it around there?
And
2007?
I think it was 7 or
Seven or
8.
seven,
It
yeah,
was
I think.
over 27 million,
Yeah.
and another one was over 23.
Yeah, one was
you know,
2007, I think, and one was a
Yeah,
little bit later.
so,
About how you started, because I remember we all had a lunch, I was sitting, you know, at a little.
And I waited on you?
At a birthday lunch one
Mhm.
day, you know, and Dolores was there, and Barbara, and you said, you used to wait on them, they come to David's upstairs
Mhm.
for drinks after work.
You didn't share that, I
And you
like
would
it.
listen to them, and you wanted to be that, you decided that's what you wanted to do, because.
Well, and you worked for Vera.
And,
And Vera
yes.
was a realtor
Well,
before
yeah.
Terry
No,
was,
no, no, no,
right?
no,
Or
no.
was
Vera, no, well, she was way after me.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, she was a travel agent after the restaurant, and then, yeah.
okay.
But no, the waitressing part with me deciding to go ahead and get into it is one night, I had worked one night, and a group of agents left a book, one of the books, and
Okay,
I mean, it was like a VIP or something.
yeah.
But it had Eddie Stockton's class in there, and I picked it up, looked at it, and I went, well, that's what.
It's a sign, I hear you.
I called the next morning and scheduled the class. So that was kind of how that played out.
Yeah,
But yeah, and I knew Virginia Brown from
Yeah.
grade school, so
Right, okay.
and what did it,
Janelle
I
know.
know Charlie always tells the story of when he came and reached out to you to come with him whenever he came and approached them here. What did that feel like on your side, did you know him that well? And whenever he came in, was that kind of a like,
No, I didn't
you know
know
what I
him
mean?
that well,
It's-
no.
We don't get to hear your side of that story very often.
no,
so
I mean, I
lay
just,
it out.
I just decided that I would love to come back home.
Yeah.
Come back home to
So did he just
Remax.
walk into your office like, I have a proposition for you, or how did that go?
Carrie had prepped
Oh, he
me
left. I was looking for him.
that possibly Charlie was thinking about buying, and would I be interested in going back to Remax? And I said, yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
The
yes.
peasants rejoice.
And the peasants
Oh,
rejoiced.
yes, let's talk. So, yeah, that's the way that happened.
Yeah, I don't see him. Well, thank you, Taryn, so much again for joining us. I
Thank you,
love getting to hear from
Stacy.
y'all. All of it's so much fun to go over it.
Thank y'all, thank y'all.